once again to Jesus or Muhammad on this program and on ABN. We do defend the truth of Christianity. We defend the truth of the gospel, but we also understand that there are threats to Christians and to others around the world and down through history for the past 14 centuries. The greatest instances of persecution have come from the Muslim world. Muslims will deny this, but that's why we're here. We're here to discuss facts and evidence and the Muslim sources. One of the things that happens, one of the interesting things that happens when we discuss Islam is that we get emails and people leave comments on YouTube and so on. People contact us and tell us, you shouldn't just sit there saying these things about Islam. You would never say these things if Zakir Naik were there. You would never say these things if Yusuf Estes were there. You would never say these things if our great apologists were there. Why do you not face them in public debate? You must be scared of them. And anyone who says that lives in an absolute fantasy world. My Muslim friends, what on earth makes you think that Zakir Naik would ever face an experienced Christian debater? He's never faced one in his entire career. Muslims think of him as this great debater, and he has debated, but he has never faced an experienced debater. In other words, if some pastor from down the street who's never debated in his life challenges Zakir Naik, suddenly Zakir Naik is very interested in debate. If Sam Shamoun or James White or someone who's had quite a bit of debate experience challenges Zakir Naik, suddenly he comes up with all these rules. No, I can't face you because of this and this and that. But Zakir Naik at least has debated some people. He's never faced an experienced Christian debater, but at least he has debated some people. The situation's different with someone like Yusuf Estes. I don't know if he's ever debated anyone, but I know every time anyone I know of has challenged him to debate, he has no interest in debating. So where are Muslims getting this idea that their champions are sitting there waiting to refute the Christians and to refute any objections to Islam? They're not. Your great champions are terrified of stepping on stage and defending Islam, defending the Quran, defending your prophet. You say, no, they're not. Well, by all means, contact them. They're not hard to find. You can contact Zakir Naik's organization. You can contact all kinds of organizations and say, hey, this Christian, David Wood, he's on TV saying you guys will never face an experienced Christian debater. Show him he's wrong. Put him in his place. And you're going to find out something very interesting about these people. You're going to find out I'm absolutely right, and they will not step on stage to defend your prophet. And if you look at the general approach, Zakir Naik's favorite venue, his favorite approach to apologetics is him standing on stage. A person gets to come up to a microphone, ask a question, and then the person sits down, and then Zakir Naik can say whatever he wants. The person isn't there to respond, right? So this isn't any kind of interaction usually. It's normally question, and then Zakir Naik gets to say whatever he wants. Yusuf Estes is very similar in that he likes to get emails. He'll get emails from someone. He'll say these on television. He'll say, hey, I got this email saying this, and he can say whatever he wants. No interaction there. Now, why is that? Why wouldn't your greatest apologists want this kind of interaction? Why wouldn't they want someone sitting there to respond to what they're saying? Well, we're going to address that tonight. We're going to look at some of the things Yusuf Estes has said on violence and terrorism. We're going to look at some video clips where he's responding to questions like, what about violence towards Jews and Christians in the Quran? What about what Islam teaches on violence and terrorism? What about these things? And we're going to look at what he says. And in the process, you're going to see why Yusuf Estes would never want anyone sitting beside him who can challenge him on his claims. It's a very simple situation. If Yusuf Estes had someone sitting beside him who knew the Quran, he would be humiliated. He would be humiliated. He would be exposed because people would be sitting there going, wow, why did Yusuf Estes say that when the Quran says something totally different? Why did Yusuf Estes tell us this when he's obviously avoiding the issue? That's what would happen if someone were sitting there right beside him. And Muslims obviously don't want that. Yusuf Estes doesn't want that. And so no debate, no genuine dialogue with anyone who really knows about Islam. And you Muslims out there, especially those of you who are Yusuf Estes fans, we'll deal with Zakir Naik and others on future programs. Right now we're going to focus on just a few claims by Yusuf Estes. Those of you who are Yusuf Estes fans, you're thinking, no. He gives good responses. That's why he's so famous, right? Well, just watch a few clips. We're going to watch some clips here, and we're going to they're going to be short clips, and we're going to look at what he says, and we're going to look at what Islam actually teaches. And I don't know how you'll miss the problem with this apologist, with this defender of Islam. So let's go ahead and go to our first clip. We'll look at Yusuf Estes being asked a question about violence towards Jews and Christians. Now, I'll tell you ahead of time, whenever he's asked, what does the Quran teach about the violence towards Jews and Christians? What does the Quran mean when it says, fight the Jews and Christians? Yusuf Estes almost always modifies the question and says, oh, well, so-and-so asked, why kill all the Jews and Christians? Why does the Quran say, kill all the Jews and Christians? I've never heard anyone say that. I'm sure some people have said, oh, the Quran says kill all the Jews and Christians. But most people, when they ask the question, they say, hey, look, I'm looking at the Quran. It says, fight those who do not believe. And in the same passage, it refers to Jews and Christians. What does that mean? And the Quran does command Muslims to fight Jews and Christians and to violently subjugate Jews and Christians, forcing us to pay the jizya. But whenever Yusuf Estes is asked anything about this, he says, oh, now you're wondering why the Quran says kill all Jews and Christians, but it doesn't say that. You see, you're wrong. Well, that's not the question, Mr. Estes. The question is, what does the Quran say, and why does it say that Muslims are supposed to fight and subjugate Jews and Christians? He'll shift the question. He'll modify the question until it sounds very weird, until it's something the Quran doesn't say. The question is about what the Quran says. And Yusuf Estes, as you're about to see, will do anything to avoid the issue. All right, let's go to our first clip.
Now let's come to the next subject. Somebody comes to us and they say, why does your book, meaning the Quran, why does your book say to kill all the Jews and Christians? Well, first of all, it doesn't say that. But still we reply back by saying, thank you for asking me about my religion. In Islam, we cannot lie. We have to tell the truth, and we have the proof to back up what we say. But sometimes people say things that are in the question is not true. So let's deal with this.
All right, notice what just happened there. Yusuf Estes is asked a question about fighting the Jews and Christians, and he represents the question as, why does the Quran command Muslims to kill all Jews and Christians? Now, I will be the first one to admit, the Quran does not say, kill all Jews and Christians. It says you fight them until you've subjugated them, until they're paying you tribute. That's what the Quran says. That's what people are wondering about. Notice he shifts the question. He changes the question. In philosophy, that's called a straw man. In logic, that's called a straw man, where you misrepresent what the opponent is saying, the opponent's position, and then you attack this misrepresentation. So a person is asking a perfectly valid question, what about violence? And it was even on the screen. You notice that. It was even on the screen. The question, does the Quran teach violence towards Jews and Christians? When Yusuf Estes has to address that topic, he modifies the question. He changes the question that's being asked from, does the Quran promote violence towards Jews and Christians, to, why does the Quran command Muslims to kill all Jews and Christians, which the Quran doesn't. That's called a straw man. He's not attacking, he's not answering the real challenge. He's not answering the real objection. He's inventing some fake objection that we don't actually have, and then attacking that and refuting that. And notice, he says, Muslims are not allowed to lie. When we have this question, it's very interesting to anyone who knows the Quran, because over and over and over again in the Muslim sources we find Muslims are allowed to lie for all kinds of reasons. One of the central reasons Muslims are allowed to lie is to protect Islam. And I'll go ahead and read the verse for you in case you think I'm making it up. We've discussed it numerous times on this program before. But let's just let's read the verse. Think about what this is saying, because Muslims will even misrepresent this verse. In other words, this verse is where we get this idea of taqiyya from, of misrepresenting or deceiving people in order to protect Islam or to protect the Muslim community. Muslims will even misrepresent what this verse says in order to keep people from knowing what Islam really teaches. So it's ironic that what this verse is teaching, Muslims will use the principle involved in order to keep people from understanding what this verse says. But let's look at what it says. Let not the believers take disbelievers for their friends in preference to believers. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah. So if you're a Muslim, you have all these Jewish and Christian friends or other non-Muslim friends when you should be friends just with your fellow Muslims, you're wrong. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to be friendly towards these Jews and Christians. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah. In other words, you're not a real Muslim. You're not a real Muslim if you have these Jewish and Christian friends. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah, unless it be that ye but guard yourselves against them, taking as it were security. So don't be friends with the Jews and Christians. You have no connection with Allah if you're friends with Jews and Christians, unless, and the unless here is giving you an opportunity where you can be friendly towards the Jews and Christians. What's the unless? Unless it be that ye but guard yourselves against them. In other words, unless they outnumber you, unless they're more powerful than you, unless you can't hope to win a physical confrontation, then you can be friendly towards them. You can be friendly towards them. So you're not allowed to have any kind of genuine friendship. You're only allowed to be friendly towards Jews and Christians if they outnumber you and you can't conquer them and subjugate them. So you are to pretend to be friendly. And if you go to the Muslim sources on this, if you go to the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, you'll find what Muhammad's companions said about this verse. According to Ibn Kathir, you are allowed to show friendship outwardly in these kinds of situations, but never inwardly. You can pretend to be friendly, but you can't really be friendly. And Abu Darda, one of Muhammad's companions, said, "We smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them." So you're a Muslim, you're talking to Jews and Christians, your heart is cursing them. I hate these people, they deserve to burn in hell. I can't wait until I can kill and subjugate them. But outwardly you smile and say, "Hi, how you doing? Hi, Assalamu alaikum." That's what this verse teaches. And if you go to the hadith, the seerah literature, the tafsir, you see over and over again Muslims are allowed to deceive unbelievers in order to protect Islam. But what does Yusuf Estes say? Muslims are not allowed to lie. Well, then Muhammad himself was a horrible sinner because he gave his followers permission to lie. So if Muslims are not allowed to lie, and Muhammad gave his followers permission to lie in all kinds of situations, well then Muhammad was doing something bad and evil. And why would you accept him as your prophet, Mr. Estes? See, this is a problem we see over and over again. Namely, Muslims say one thing. This is what Islam teaches, and we find their prophet doing the exact opposite. So Muslims have a choice. Either you stick with your moral principle, no lying in Islam, in which case Muhammad was a horrible, wicked sinner, or you let Muhammad do the teaching for your religion. You let Muhammad and his teachings establish what is lawful or unlawful in Islam. If you do that, there's no question Muslims are allowed to deceive unbelievers. And what's very interesting is that this situation that we're talking about right now, what's Yusuf Estes doing? What's Yusuf Estes doing? He's trying to convince us that Islam is peaceful and tolerant and wonderful and kind and friendly. He's doing exactly what 328 says to do. Yusuf Estes speaks about Islam in the West, where Muslims are outnumbered, where Muslims can't actively go out and subjugate and defeat the unbelievers. They can't do it. They can't do it. So what are they supposed to do in these situations? They're supposed to smile in our faces while they curse us in their hearts. And here you have Yusuf Estes saying, we're not allowed to lie. We're not allowed to lie. Islam is friendly and peaceful and tolerant. Exactly what this verse tells him to. Tells him how to deceive unbelievers. And then he does it, and in the same breath says, we're not allowed to deceive people. Very interesting religion, my Muslim friends, that you have there. All right, let's go on to the next clip, and we'll start getting into some of Yusuf Estes' response. Some of this I'm not going to say much about because it would take too long to respond to some of these issues. Some of the points might require a full show to discuss them, but I want you to see his complete answer, right? So, in other words, I've broken this his response up into several clips to see what he says about Islam and terrorism and violence. So let's go on to the next clip and see Estes continue his
What
response.
does it say in the Quran? Actually, we'll begin with the first instance of this in the Quran in chapter 2, called Surah Baqarah, the cow, verse 190, telling us about fighting. And it says, you fight them where they fight you. But if they stop, you stop. Because otherwise you become the transgressor. Verily, Allah does not love the transgressors. Next verse, and kill them wherever you find them, and turn them out from where they turned you out. But again, it's reminding you, you have to stop if they stop.
Very, very interesting. Now notice, if this were just kind of the beginning of his response, this might be okay, but this is what he discusses. This is his entire discussion focuses on this passage of the Quran. Why is that disturbing? Well, the Quran says in Surah 9, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and it specifically refers to the people of the book, Jews and Christians. So you have a clear command in the Quran, Surah 9:29, to fight and subjugate Jews and Christians, and the reasons given for fighting and subjugating us are, we believe false things about God. And since we believe these false things about God and we teach people false things about God, Muslims have to subjugate us in order to silence us and in order to make us pay the jizya. That's what Islam teaches in Surah 9:29. Now, Yusuf Estes is asked a simple question. What about this? Yusuf, could you explain what the Quran says about fighting these Jews and Christians? And what does he say? Well, let me go to Surah 2, verse 190. Why would he do that? That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about Surah 2, 190. Muslims weren't in the position to subjugate Jews and Christians. They weren't in a position to call for a war against Jews and Christians. Why bring this up? In the context, this is talking about Muhammad's dealings with the pagans at a time when jihad was defensive jihad. And just to review, you can watch my video on YouTube, 3 Stages of Jihad. When Muslims are completely outnumbered, in other words, when they form a small minority of the population, they are not allowed to fight, even defensively. If they get persecuted, hey, too bad, nothing I can do about it, right? That was the situation in the early Muslim community. Later, when Muslims are capable of waging a terrorist campaign or something like that, they are allowed to fight defensively. In other words, people are messing with Muslims. A place like the United States is messing around in Muslim countries, in Iraq or in Afghanistan. Muslims are allowed to fight defensively. It's different from what we think of as defensive fighting. When we think of defensive fighting, we think someone's coming to attack you, you defend yourself. Muslims are thinking of it, I mean, at least as far as Islam teaches, Muslims are thinking of it very differently. They're thinking of a situation where someone is attacking the Muslim community anywhere, well, now you can go do various things to this country. So if the United States is meddling in Islam's affairs in various places in the world, well, now you can engage in terrorism against the United States. This passage of the Quran is part of that defensive stage where if someone's doing something to you, someone's persecuting you, then you can defend yourself. You can attack them because they're messing with you. Now, any knowledgeable Muslim will know this. Any Muslim who studies the historical context of the Quran knows this, that during this period, jihad was a defensive matter. Why is this concerning us about Yusuf Estes? Well, this isn't the final revelation. Muhammad's final marching orders come later in Surah 9, and Surah 9 commands Muslims to engage in offensive jihad. Once Muslims are capable of fighting and subjugating people, not just fighting defensively, hey, we can defend ourselves, hey, we can launch some terrorist attacks, something like that. When Muslims are capable of actively going out and fighting and subjugating people, they are commanded to do so in Surah 9. But Yusuf Estes ignores the calls for offensive jihad, for fighting and subjugating Jews and Christians and other non-believers. And he goes to the defensive stage and says, well, let's focus on this. Why would he do that? Why would he ignore? Again, the question, if he had been asked, what about Muhammad's early dealings with the pagans when, after the Muslims migrated to Medina, what about that? This would be the place where you go. If you're asked about what Islam teaches about Jews and Christians and how you're supposed to deal with them, that's when you go to Surah 9. Those are the passages, those are the verses that deal with this issue. So he's asked about this, and instead of going to the passages that actually deal with the issue, he goes to a passage that deals with pagans. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Unless you're deliberately trying to keep people from knowing what Islam teaches. But let's go ahead and read this so you can understand his comments on it. This is Surah 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 190. We'll read a couple of the verses. The passage says, "Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you." So self-defense. You're fighting people who are fighting you. "But do not transgress limits, for Allah loveth not transgressors. And slay them wherever ye catch them, and turn them out from where they have turned you out, for tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. But fight them not at the sacred mosque, unless they first fight you there. But if they fight you, slay them. Such is the reward of those who suppress faith. But if they cease, Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. And fight them on until there is no more tumult or oppression, and there prevail justice and faith in Allah. But if they cease, let there be no hostility except to those who practice oppression." If they cease, if they stop attacking you, well, go ahead and live in peace with them. Now, that's not a horrible teaching. Fight if someone's attacking you, but if they stop attacking you, leave them alone. Now, actually, it's not as simple as that. That's how Yusuf Estes misrepresents it. If they stop attacking you, then you don't attack them. Actually, it refers to a much broader context. If they're persecuting you at all. In other words, during this time, Muslims weren't allowed to take the pilgrimage to Mecca because the pagans said, you can't come here anymore. We don't like what you're doing. So that has to stop. Things like that have to stop. Not allowing Muslims to perform their religious practices. Any of this counts as persecution. And so Muslims are allowed to defend themselves against all of this. In other words, if you're in Mecca and you are in charge of the Kaaba and you don't let Muslims come there, they are allowed to attack you. You don't have to actually be marching an army out to violently kill Muslims or something like that. You just have to be interfering with their Islamic practices somehow. So but in general, this isn't horrible. This isn't going around slaughtering and maiming people and so on. So what we have here is defensive jihad. Nothing wrong here. Now, why would Yusuf Estes go here when he's asked about fighting Jews and Christians? This has nothing to do with fighting Jews and Christians. Why would he go here? Because Yusuf Estes wants people to think that Islam only promotes fighting if it's in a defensive context. And you don't do that if you go to Surah 9. If you go to Surah 9, you find the call for offensive jihad. So that's why Yusuf Estes just doesn't go there. He goes to an earlier passage that has nothing to do with the question. That has nothing to do with the question. All right, I want to get to our next video clip, but we have a caller? All right, let's take a caller first, and then we'll go on to our next video clip.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, do you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I do hear you, yes.
Hi, who are we talking to?
Hello, praise the Lord, brother. My name is Shilpa. I'm calling from London.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, it's great. I'm only calling to encourage you people. I got to know about Brother David Rhodes through Nabil's testimony, and since then I've been fascinated by the work you're doing, and I continue to remember you in my prayers. May my God bless what you are doing, and I'm sure you'll be rewarded according to Hebrews 6:10. So I just want to tell you, I know you'd like to know that many more and more people are praying for the service you're doing. So that's the reason I'm calling. I just have 3 points to make. I just downloaded Quran very recently, and I started reading it because I always wanted to, but I didn't know I could read it in my phone as well, so I downloaded it, and I'm reading it. So Jesus, the Surah 457, which says Jesus is accursed. Allah didn't want to didn't want Jesus to be accursed. That's why he, lifted him from the cross and didn't let him die. But if, as Christians believe, if Jesus is God, I don't think he was accursed just when he went on the cross, but as soon as he took the human form, he gave up his glory. So I don't think just when he went on the cross, that wasn't the point when he was accursed. So I don't think that's completely accurate, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And second point is that usually Muslims, wherever they are, they're so interested in numbers, how many Muslims there are and how they're increasing in number. And even in the debates that I watched your debates, the opponent says there are maybe billions and billions of Muslims, but Jesus, which is on the contrary, Jesus says in Luke 15:4 and in other Gospels as well that if he had 100 sheep and one sheep goes missing, goes astray, he would leave 99 and go after the one sheep. So it just shows that numbers have nothing to do about the real faith in Christianity. So shouldn't really be nothing to do with any religion if it was a true religion. As I was reading the Quran, also I noticed that Allah in the Quran, the way it comes out is it just tries to forcibly tell us that Allah is merciful rather than proving to us that Allah is merciful. For example, in chapter 4, 15 and 16, it only gives a chance for men to repent, but it doesn't actually give a leeway for women to repent. But it still says Allah is merciful and forgiving and everything. I don't think Allah was very forgiving towards women in that verse. But if you see in Bible, in Psalm 34:8, it says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." So it's Bible has an open invitation for everyone to test God and see that He is good. So these are the few differences, complete opposite differences that I've noticed, and I hope any Muslims who are watching will think about them and know the real God and have real joy. That's all I wanted to tell.
All right, thank you, sister. And you brought up 3 points. One, Surah 4, 157 of the Quran, 157, 158. Let me go ahead and read that for our viewers who aren't familiar with what Islam teaches. This has the Jews boasting that they killed the Messiah. Now, why is this absurd? Well, Jews are never going to boast that they killed the Messiah. Anyone who would be happy about Jesus dying or happy about killing Jesus obviously didn't believe that he was the Messiah, or he wouldn't have killed him. But the Quran isn't the most consistent or logical book. But these Jews said in boast, in Surah 4, 157, "We killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. But they killed him not, nor crucified him. But so it was made to appear to them, and those who differ therein are full of doubts with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow, for of a surety they killed him not. Nay, Allah raised him up unto himself, and Allah is exalted in power, wise." Now, Muslims will say the reason Allah saved Jesus here is to prevent him from dying an accursed death. And this really strikes at the heart of the gospel, which is that Jesus, according to the Apostle Paul, became a curse for us. In other words, our sins call for a curse from God. Jesus took that upon himself. He bore that curse for us on the cross. Now, this is interesting because this actually relates to the third point that our sister made. About, the Quran says over and over and over again that Allah is most merciful. And, we want to ask ourselves, why? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? What does Allah's mercy mean? How does that apply to us? And the only thing you can say is, well, if you repent to Allah and you start loving Allah and doing what Allah says, then He'll love you back. Now, the reason that's interesting is that's the sort of love that Jesus condemned. What does he say in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount? What does Jesus say? If you love those who love you, what are you doing? Even the pagans do that. Tax collectors do that. They love people who love them. But that's the kind of love the Quran presents Allah as having. He loves people who love him first. Very different from the picture in Christianity where God loves us so much that even while we're still sinners, he enters into creation to pay the price for our sins. In other words, if we say that our God is merciful, we know what that means. We see it displayed in his actions. If we ask, why is Allah merciful? Well, you open the Quran, you don't see a lot of mercy here. I mean, towards good Muslims, you might see some mercy for little things that they've done. But for other people, for Jews, for Christians, for pagans, for women, you don't see a lot of mercy. So what does this really cash out to? But on a related note, one of the reasons this is so interesting is, and I did a video on this, if you, sister, if you want to Google my video, Who Killed Muhammad? Very interesting that in Islam, Allah protects Jesus. He protects Jesus from dying this humiliating death. But in Islam, how did Muhammad die? He was poisoned by a Jewish woman whose family his soldiers had slaughtered. So this is the Battle of Khaybar. Muslims go in, they kill a bunch of people. They kill this woman's family. And then she comes to Muhammad and cooks him dinner, and he eats it. He actually eats a dinner prepared by a woman whose family had just been slaughtered by Muslims. Not the brightest star in the sky here. But think about what happens. Muhammad gets worse and worse because he eats this food. Well, it says he took it in his mouth, and some sources say he spit it out and so on, but he got poisoned. And it takes him a while. It takes him about 2 years before he actually dies of it, and he dies just wallowing in complete agony. Aisha, who was there at Muhammad's death, said she had never seen anyone going through as much pain as Muhammad did. So, not according to me, according to Islam, Allah wouldn't let Jesus die this horrible death at the hands of these unbelievers. No, no, no. Allah is not going to do that. He's not going to allow that to happen to Jesus. But we turn to Muhammad. Muhammad gets killed by who? A Jewish woman. And he dies this horrible, agonizing death. And I would just ask, so we're talking about Allah's mercy. Allah's merciful. He's not going to allow that sort of thing to happen to Jesus. He certainly let much pain, agony happen to Muhammad. So why? What's the difference? Why does Jesus stand out when Muhammad doesn't? And the other point, which I agree with, Islam growing, I think this is one of the silliest arguments. I actually have, Muslims will use arguments like this all the time. I had one Muslim tell me, Muhammad Ali was the greatest boxer of his time. He converted to Islam. Show me a sports figure as great as Muhammad Ali who converted to Christianity, and then you can tell me something about Christianity. Really? That's how we're judging our religions? A very popular person converted, therefore that's evidence for the position? I mean, if you're going to say that, well, Tom Cruise has been in a lot of blockbuster movies. He became a Scientologist, therefore Scientology is true. What kind of argument is that? And the idea here is that in general, Muslims will cling to anything they can point to about Islam. They will turn it into an argument. And they say Islam is fast growing. Islam is growing rapidly. Well, it's important to know Islam isn't growing rapidly because of lots of conversions. There are conversions to Islam, but that's not the main source of Islam's growth. The main source of Islam's growth is high birth rates, especially in Muslim countries. Many Muslim countries are third world countries, mostly because Islam keeps them third world countries, prevents them from advancing. And one of the characteristics of third world countries is high birth rates. So if you go to a place like America, people are having their 1 or 2 children, if they're having any. But most people are having, if they have children at all, are having 1 or 2. You do have people who have 10 or 12 or something like that, but they're rare. Most people have 1 or 2 children. And you go to Muslim countries and they're having 4 or 6 or 8. And so, wow, look how fast Islam is spreading. Why? Because lots of Muslim countries are third world nations. That's evidence that Islam is true. And it's easy to flip this back and say, okay, if you're just going to go with numbers, what's the largest religion in the world? More people adhere to belief in Jesus' death, deity, and resurrection than adhere to Islam. So if we're just going to go with numbers here, don't go with what's growing rapidly, go with what's the biggest. Christianity is the biggest, therefore Christianity is true. But it would never cross my mind to say Christianity is really big, so Christianity is true. It would never cross my mind. But I tell you this, if Islam ever becomes the biggest religion in the world, I guarantee you Muslims will say, you see, Islam is the largest religion. That proves that it's true. And 10 years later, if Islam is no longer the largest religion, if some other religion is the largest, suddenly that will not be any evidence at all for that other religion. So the general principle, once again, is whatever Muslims can find to use, whatever Muslims can use to support Islam, that's a great argument, as long as it supports Islam. And the result is Muslims have a lot of horrible, horrible arguments, and that's just one of them. All right, we have more callers. Should we go to some more callers before we... Hey, Jabari, are you there?
Yes,
hey,
I am.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's amazing to see you all alone and no Pastor Joseph or Sam Shamoon.
Yeah. We had to cut back on the uglier people. No, I'm just kidding. They had to cut back on the better looking people because people were being distracted by Sam Shamoon's good looks and bald head.
Yeah. I just want to say something about two things about Yusuf Estes. First, isn't it true that Yusuf Estes is a so-called convert from Christianity? Although I don't think he knew Jesus intimately, or otherwise he would have never converted. And on that same note, if you saw a video on James White has on YouTube when Yusuf Estes is trying to explain the Trinity on the Dean Show, it just shows he knew nothing about the Lord Jesus at all, intellectually or intimately. And also, I just want to say here that Yusuf Estes is a coward because he's unwilling to debate anyone on this, anyone. So, and he's just, and he probably knows he's lying right now on these clips that he's using. He's clips that you're showing too.
All right, thank you, Jabari, and I happen to agree with everything you said. Yes, for those, and I probably should have mentioned this, Yusuf Estes claims to be a former, was a former Christian. It's very interesting because Muslims will say all the time, he was a Christian pastor, he was a Christian minister. When Yusuf Estes is cornered on this and say, what do you mean when you say you're a Christian minister? He say, well, I tried to tell people about Islam. So that's kind of a minister, right? I mean, I tried to tell people about Christianity. I tried to preach the gospel. Not that he was some official pastor, leader of a church or something like that. So Yusuf Estes tries to convince people that Christianity is true at some point in his life. He became a Muslim, and if you listen to his testimony, which you can find all over the internet, anyone who's actually in touch with reality, this is so silly. He says he was trying to preach to a Muslim, and the Muslim said he could prove the existence of God. And Yusuf Estes, what? You arguments, evidence? No. Christianity is based on having no arguments and no evidence. What kind of Christianity was Yusuf Estes practicing that didn't involve any kinds of arguments or evidence? If you go to the Gospels, wherever the apostles went, they said, believe in Jesus' resurrection. They gave an argument for it. They said he died on the cross. This was a public event. And he rose from the dead. We're the witnesses. What is that? They're appealing to public knowledge, common knowledge, and eyewitness testimony. They're making an argument for the resurrection. You might not like their argument. You might not be convinced by their argument, but they're arguing, right? You go to Apollos, it says he vigorously refuted his opponents in public debate. We have in the New Testament commands to engage in public debate. Obviously, this is a religion that promotes discussion and dialogue and debate. And Yusuf Estes is totally confused. What? This Muslim says he can prove things about the existence of God. That's totally contrary to Christianity. This is what Yusuf Estes will say when he's on stage. And then this Muslim said, yes, I can prove the existence of God. Do you mean as a Christian you can't? And Yusuf Estes said he was shocked. Oh no, as a Christian I can't prove anything. Now the reason this is so silly, I'm a philosopher, right? That's what when I'm not on Jesus or Muhammad or writing something on my blog, I'm a philosopher. That's what I do. All of the major defenders of the existence of God in the philosophical world, the ones who go out there and debate, they're all Christians. They're all Christians. I'm not saying every person who defends the existence of God in the world is a Christian. You can defend the existence of God as a Muslim. You can defend the existence of God as something else. I'm talking about at the philosophical level, the ones who are getting on stage and engaging with the great champion atheists of our time. They're Christians. They're Christians defending this. And Yusuf Estes saying, oh, Muslims are the ones who defend the existence of God. I don't know of a Muslim philosopher who's defending the existence of God. I'm sure there is one out there. But I don't know of any. They're certainly not popular. I have books and books and books on philosophy of religion, on arguments for and against the existence of God. All the major defenders are Christians. Yet Yusuf Estes will get on stage and say, no, it's Muslims out there who are defending the existence of God. Christians, they don't have any idea of evidence or argumentation. And it's just so ridiculous. That's the sort of nonsense that Yusuf Estes puts out there. And the reason that's part of the reason why, obviously, he doesn't want someone sitting on the opposite side of the stage with him to correct him on these things. And so, yes, I would agree with Jabari that you have to be a coward, right? In other words, it's one thing to say, whatever people believe, that's fine. I'm going to go live in my house and, I'm going to leave everyone alone. That's one thing. It's something else entirely to constantly be making claims about other people's religion that are false. And you don't dare step on stage to let them defend what they believe. You don't do it. You're terrified of getting on stage so that they can refute what you're saying. Now, right here, there's no Muslim representative. Any Muslim in the world is welcome to call in. But anything you really challenge me on, what happens? We say, all right, let's debate it. Let's debate it. Let's get on stage. Let's deal with these issues. We're open. If you disagree with our claims, we are open to defending our beliefs in public debate. Why? Because we believe we can actually defend them. If Yusuf Estes actually believed that he could defend his claims against the objections of Christians or Jews or whoever, wouldn't he do it? Wouldn't he want to get up on stage and show you, ha, I can refute you, I can refute your objections? Why wouldn't he do that? The only response is he knows it won't work, in which case he's talking about Christianity and Judaism constantly saying that Christianity is false, constantly saying that Islam is true, and terrified of actually defending that in public because he knows he can't. That's pretty sad. The other thing Jabari brought up was that James White had made several responses, and I highly recommend James White's responses to Yusuf Estes on the Dean Show. So if you type in James White or Yusuf Estes on the Dean Show, James White has made a series of videos, and you'll actually see how very little Yusuf Estes knows about the Bible. Well, there are two possibilities, right? One, Yusuf Estes is totally ignorant of what the Bible teaches, in which case, why is anyone listening to him as an authority on what Christianity teaches? Or two, if you don't want to say he's being deceptive, if you don't want to say he's ignorant, the alternative is that he's deceptive. In other words, he either knows what he's talking about, in which case he's deliberately misrepresenting and distorting what Christianity teaches, or he has no clue what he's talking about. So take your pick, Muslims. He's either ignorant or he's deceptive. But those are your alternatives when someone is just spouting all of this tremendous nonsense about Christianity. And again, it's not just about Christianity. We're not even dealing with that tonight. We're dealing with what he says about Islam, and we're going to see that almost everything he says about Islam is wrong. So once again, my Muslim friends, you have to pick. Is Yusuf Estes being deceptive? Does he know the truth about Islam? Does he know what the Quran actually teaches, and he's deliberately misrepresenting it? Or is he just ignorant? In other words, why did he go to Surah 2, verse 190, when he's asked about something that happens in Surah 9? Why did he go to the wrong part of the Quran to even deal with this? Why did he go to the totally wrong part of Islamic history to answer this question? Either because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's actually ignorant. Well, I don't know what's in Surah 9. I haven't read it. Or he does know what's in Surah 9, and he deliberately avoided it and tried to deflect attention to some other topic. What's going on here? I'd like to know. Or if you can defend him, somehow. I'd love to see that as well. All right, should we go to another caller? CL.
Hey, man, what's up?
Hey, you treacherous traitor, leaving the state.
Man, I'm checking you out, though. I'm putting my input in.
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much, man. I'm just following what you're saying. You got a good show going on. Just wanted to touch on 2 points.
Okay.
About Estes.
Mm-hmm.
You're right that he's heavily promoted as being a former minister. I've heard him speak live before. I've watched a number of his DVDs, and I've read a lot of material on his website. He's given his bio a number of different times.
Now, CL, was this when you were a Muslim, or is this when you were a Christian?
While I was a Muslim.
Okay, so while you were a Muslim, are you saying you liked him, or you just you happened to look over some of his stuff, or did you actually did you like him as a Muslim teacher?
I never considered him as a Muslim teacher.
Okay.
Well,
first, better yet, tell us what you thought of him when you were a Muslim, and then you could tell us what you think of him now as a Christian.
As a Muslim, I thought of him as someone who became Muslim, who was basically helping the dawah, helping spread the word of Islam to non-Muslims. He had a nice testimony. He had some nice things to say. I never took him as a source of knowledge. He's not a very knowledgeable person about Christianity or Islam. I never really took him as like a serious speaker, a serious type person.
Yeah, and for the record, that's the impression that I get. That's the impression that I get when I'm listening to his answers. I'm thinking, wow, I think I know way more about Islam than this guy does, and he's such a popular speaker. He's the one that goes around speaking at all the events.
I'll give you an example. Not too recently, like a couple of years ago, during a lecture, if you search YouTube, you probably could find it. Someone asked him a question, and he says in the question, "If you don't believe me, go ask a scholar, a very well-known scholar named Al-Albani. He's a famous scholar." He said, "Go ask him if you don't believe me." The problem was, Albani has been dead for over a decade. It's like, so he's, he gets his facts mixed up, he gets his dates mixed up, is well known, but he still gets heavily promoted, and a part of his promotion is him being quote unquote an ex-minister. According to his own bio, he was he was in the gospel music industry. So that's the extent of him being a minister. He was never ordained. He never held office in the church. He was never elder or pastor, But they like to use this word minister, which shows you you see this a lot in the so-called dawah. This exaggeration and these,
Yeah, because if you're a Muslim, you know what people are thinking when you say Christian minister, right?
Yeah.
So you could defend it and say, well, he's someone who, presented the gospel to people or something like that. But when people hear Christian minister, they're thinking some kind of church leader, right?
Exactly.
And so they say that knowing that it's going to be misinterpreted and knowing that it's going to sort of raise his status as someone who was really knowledgeable about Christianity when obviously he had no clue what he was talking about.
Not only was he not ordained, he was not a minister. According to his own bio, he never mentions anything about having any type of education in theology or anything like that. Never attended Bible college, never went to a seminary.
Well, no, he would have failed. He would have failed out of any Bible college.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he's just as knowledgeable about Christian doctrine as the average Muslim, which is almost zero. So I've yet to find a Muslim who can actually tell me, what Christians believe about the Trinity. Not what they think about the Trinity. What is it that we believe about the Trinity?
Yeah, and that's something James White has challenged, people repeatedly on. And really, this is a huge issue. The people who become the most popular Muslim speakers about Christianity, so Muslims who are going around telling people about Christianity, the most popular ones are the ones who are the most ignorant of Christianity. So you have Muslims out there who are teaching at some Western university, and they teach religious studies or something like that, and they actually have studied Christianity. And then you have these people who just, it's total nonsense. Everything out of their mouth about Christian history or about what the Bible teaches, they're totally clueless, and they're the ones that Muslims say, you see, this is the guy who can really educate people about Christianity. And I would be horrified if that were the situation. It happens. It can happen. In other words, a Christian speaker who's talking about Islam but doesn't know anything about Islam, he could, in theory, become popular. But I wouldn't be happy about that. I would be saying, why are you listening to this guy? He's not accurate in what he says. He's not accurate in what he's telling people about Islam. and as I mean, James White points this out regularly. Why don't we see that from Islam? Why don't we see Muslims, if they are concerned for truth, why don't we see Muslims standing up and saying, Yusuf Estes, what you're saying is wrong. Stop saying it. Stop saying it. If this is the religion of truth, you shouldn't be saying false things about Christianity. You shouldn't be misrepresenting their views. Joshua Evans, you shouldn't be misrepresenting Christianity. Zakir Naik, you shouldn't be misrepresenting Christianity. You shouldn't be doing this. But instead, Muslims just cheer them on. Keep going, guys. Keep misrepresenting and distorting Christianity. And by the way, I mean, my friends, I'm pointing this out because this tells you something about the religion.
Exactly.
You could have if it were just one person or a few people or a small minority, that wouldn't tell you much of anything about the religion. But when the entire community seems overwhelmingly intent on misrepresenting other people's beliefs and even misrepresenting their own beliefs, how can you say that this religion is concerned with truth? And Islam obviously isn't. In Christianity, we are called to a higher standard. We are called to a higher standard. When I try to speak about Islam, I will be the first to admit I'm not perfect. I have not always said everything. If you search through everything I've ever said about Islam, you could find stuff where I make a mistake. If you search for things I've said about Christianity, you could find places where I where I said something false or I misquoted a verse or something like that. You could find that. I admit that I'm not perfect, but here's the thing. It's never, never intentional. I'm always striving after the truth. I'm striving to speak accurately. On a daily basis, I try to learn more about Islam so that when I speak about it correctly. And where are the Muslims like that? Where are the Muslims who say, I really want to, I don't believe in Christianity. I think it's false. I think it was corrupted, but I really want to study. So whenever I speak about Christianity, I am telling the truth about what Christians believe, and then I will expose them. But we don't see that. We see, let's just make up a bunch of stuff and invent a bunch of stuff, and it happened at the Council of Nicaea, and blah, 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 and we'll attack Christianity based on that. That's what we see from the Muslim community. Why?
And exactly. Right. When you talked about some of the more famous apologists in Christianity. Mm-hmm. But when you look at them, they're always quoting what? Quran. They're quoting the Hadith. They're going to the primary sources. Mm-hmm. I don't see a whole lot of inaccurate information. Like you said, people make mistakes, but I don't see a lot of inaccurate information coming from the Christian side.
Yeah, and normally, let's face it, and what we'll be doing tonight and tomorrow and so on, and what I do on my YouTube videos and what you do, it's normally us correcting Muslims on what they believe, right? It's normally us saying, hey, you just said this about your religion. So Yusuf Estes, you just said Muslims aren't allowed to lie. Actually, your prophet disagreed with you. Your prophet says you can lie, you can deceive the unbelievers. Here, let me show you from the Quran and the commentaries. Or Yusuf Estes, you just said Islam doesn't allow you to fight and subjugate people. Let me show you what your sources actually say. It's us telling Muslims what they're supposed to be believing from their prophet. We don't believe their prophet, but we at least want them to be accurate about what their prophet said. We're the ones that are, whether we're talking about Christianity or Islam, we're the ones who are constantly fighting for truth and accuracy. And Muslims, whether they're talking about Christianity or Islam, they're misrepresenting Christianity. And as you'll see Yusuf Estes doing tonight, they're misrepresenting Islam.
Exactly. And before I go, I wanted to put two verses out there.
Okay.
Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, for the Muslims, I would recommend you read the whole entire chapter, but I just want to quote just a little bit of it. Romans chapter 5 and 8. But God demonstrated his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And I want to skip over to verse number 10. For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? And I wanted to quote that just to touch on your point, which you made earlier about the human having to earn his position, his justification in the love of Allah, if Allah turns to him. But in Christianity, we say it the opposite way. The God is the one who turned to us while we were yet sinners. We have nothing to bring to the table.
And that's interesting. This is the point the sister brought up earlier is, Muslims try to argue that Christianity, by saying that God entered creation as a man, that this man-centered religion is obviously invented by men and stuff, and it denies God's glory. But it's actually the reverse. Islam is this very man-centered religion. It's on you how God is going to react. So you go do certain things, and then God is going to react and respond to what you do. When in Christianity, it's God. It's God. You're sitting here. You're a sinner. God is concerned about you. He does something. He takes action to save you. So ours is a very God-centered religion. Islam, they maintain belief in God, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's you do this and you do this and you do this and you do that, and then God might love you. God might love you if you do all these things.
Exactly. No, I mean, I can say as a former Muslim, I'm glad that the true and living God came and saved me, because what I was doing, running around with a beard and a long robe and prostrating to Mecca, and
I'll tell you, CL, you look like a total terrorist in your when you had the beard and stuff, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was all about Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah,
it was about the Quran and Sunnah, living the Quran and Sunnah, and I was, And the final years of me being Muslim, I was a Wahhabi, so you can't get too much stricter than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know how it feels to try to emulate Muhammad. Mm-hmm. I emulated Muhammad in the way I used the bathroom, the way I slept, the way I dressed, the way I ate my food, the way I drank my drink, everything. So I tried my best to be like Muhammad, and it didn't really get me that far.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This goes back to what we were just saying about Islam being this man-centered religion. Muhammad's just a dude, right? He's just a guy. He's just a man. He's not divine. But imitate him in every way, including how he went to the bathroom. Why? He's just a man, right? I thought he was just a man. I thought he's just another guy who brought.
But that's because my Muslims out there, we're not trying to insult you, but the reality is, you're not really thinking about the implications of what you believe. You're not thinking about the implications of Christianity. You're taking very shallow arguments, very shallow thoughts, and you're running with it. And it wasn't until I sat down and really thought about these things that it became, my conscience became troubled, because things weren't adding up from the Islamic side.
Mm-hmm. Well, they certainly weren't. They never have been. But praise the Lord for you. Brother, look forward to having you on the show whenever you get a chance. When are you going to be back in town?
I should be back Saturday night.
You mean tomorrow night?
Yep. I don't know if I'll be back before 10 or not.
All right. If you are, you know where I'll be. You can just zoom on over here.
Are you going to be on Sunday?
No, just Saturday.
Oh, just Saturday.
Uh-huh.
Well, if I get back in town, I'll be there.
All right. All right, brother. Okay. We'll catch you next time. Who's our next caller? Tony.
Hello. Yes, how you doing, sir?
How you doing, Tony?
Okay. I want to ask a couple of questions.
Now, Tony.
Yes.
Tony, I want to say, every question you've ever asked us has been totally wrong. So we're giving you another chance.
Isn't it that's what Jesus said? There's no one is perfect.
Yeah. Okay. We're just saying.
So
we're just saying.
You don't accept me.
No. Look. We're not perfect. I'm saying, we all make mistakes. But one of the things we pointed out is if you're striving after truth, you're gonna try to be accurate. And so we're hoping that this is an accurate question. All right. What do you got?
Okay,
and I hope it's on the topic, because we're getting away from the topic. But let's go.
I'm not giving you anything from my mouth. I'm giving you something from the Bible. So why you don't accept the Bible the way I'm telling you?
Because you never say what's correct about the Bible. And Tony, I'll say, we keep getting away from the topic. Do you have something for us on the topic for tonight?
Something from the topic.
Okay, what's up?
You said Jesus Christ was a good man, right?
Yes, of course he was.
And he loved everybody the same, right?
Go ahead with your question.
Okay. In Mark chapter 27.
Mark 27? There is no Mark 27, brother. So what are you talking about?
Mark 7, number 27. But Jesus said unto her, Let the children first to be filled, for it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it unto the dogs. You want to tell me Jesus accept and say that other people than the Jews, they are dogs?
Wow. Well, Tony, sorry, it's another swing and a miss, my friend. And this is something we see quite often. People will take that verse where Jesus says something to this woman and ignore what the rest of the passage. And let's go ahead and read the passage in context to see what happens, because people say, look, he only liked the Jews and he hated this pagan woman. Let's read what actually, instead of just ripping that one verse out of context. And again, Tony, if you've read the passage, you know what it says. You know what it says. So if you just rip that little verse out of context, it's getting old. It's getting old. Let's read it in context. So this is Mark chapter 7, beginning at verse 24. Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. And when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he was saying to her, Let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. But she answered and said to him, Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. And he said to her, Because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left. Now, Muslims zero in on that and says, you see, he's calling her a dog. At no point did he say, you're a dog, woman. What did he say? He said, if you have food that's for a child, right, that's for your children, you wouldn't toss that to the dogs, right? Because the food's not meant for the dogs. You brought that food for your children. And he says, similarly, this is the point he's making. It's called an analogy, right? If I say, let me give you an example. There's an argument against for abortion, right? For abortion. And they say, you wouldn't call killing an acorn killing an oak, would you? No. So don't call killing a fetus killing a full-grown human being, right? That's a bad argument. But think about what's saying. Are you calling a child an acorn? No. You're drawing a comparison in one situation. You're saying the comparison applies elsewhere. If you look at what happens here, right? Who is he talking to? Read the parallel versions. Read the parallel versions that we have. Who's Jesus talking to here? You had the pagans, right? So you have the nation of Israel. They're promoting theism. And you had the pagans who are constantly corrupting their religion, altering their religion, driving the Jews back to paganism, right? And then Jesus comes along, and one of the pagans, one of the Gentiles, who had spent centuries attacking the truth about God, comes along. Jesus, I want a miracle. I want a miracle because my daughter is sick. Well, does she deserve a miracle? Is she come from a group that deserves a miracle? You would say no. And Jesus said, wait a minute. Is it right for me to take I brought these miracles for the children of Israel. Is it right for me to give it to you? And then what does he do? What does he do, Tony? Why did you leave this out? He heals her daughter anyway. Why did you leave? Why? How could you possibly leave that out? How could you leave that out, Tony? He says, I've only been brought with the miracles for the children of Israel, right? That's what he's saying according to you. He only likes the Jews. He doesn't like the pagans. Why did you leave out what he did immediately afterwards? And he healed her. He healed the woman's daughter. What's that mean? He gave her the miracle. So, Tony, why would you leave that out? It's just, it's really, really sad. And it's really sad to see you doing it. It's really sad to see Muslims doing this sort of thing. All right, should we go to more callers or clips or what? Who do we have on the line? Hey, do you hear me?
David, am I on?
Yeah.
Oh, my name is Jim. I've had a question for several weeks.
Hey, what's
and
up?
It does have to do somewhat with the topic.
Okay, cool.
It is in Surah 9, and it is Ayah 111. And I have several translations in front of me. Would you prefer one Hilali Khan, Picknall, Yusuf Ali,
Go with Hillel Khan. And I said Hillel Khan because Yusuf Estes says that's his favorite translation of the Quran. So go with that one.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, mine too. Mine too. For everyone out there, I like Hillel Khan.
1928, and you know that one, I'm sure. Verily, Allah has purchased of the believers their lives and their properties for the price that there shall be paradise. Period. They fight in Allah's cause, so they kill others and are killed. Period. Okay, we know what Islam is about now. Next sentence. It is a promise in truth, which is binding on him in the Torah, and the Injil, Gospel, and the Quran. Now, my position is that's an outright lie. What do you think?
Yeah, you find this throughout the Muslim sources, constantly saying, "Oh, the Bible taught this," and you even have all these obviously silly stories. Wherever Muhammad goes, there's Jews and Christians saying, "Oh, we were waiting for you. We knew you were coming because of what is in the Torah and the Gospel talking about you." And it's just the reason that's so silly is because we still have those books. We still have these texts. Where are all these references to Muhammad? What Christian is ever going to be saying, I've read my Bible and there's an Arabian prophet going to come to me? Where are you ever going to get that? If you're a Jew, right? You raised on the Torah. Where are you ever going to say, there's this Arabian prophet going to come along, and he's actually going to do a lot of fighting against the Jews and Christians, and he's going to subjugate us and establish this new religion? Where are you ever going to get that from? But yes, you have Muhammad constantly saying that this stuff is coming from the Torah and the Gospel, and you're right, it's obvious nonsense. But one thing I do want to point out, if you want to add something, you can. The fighting here. The fighting here is very important because Yusuf Estes is going to define. He's going to define what it means to fight if you're a Muslim. And it says, fighting in Allah's way. They fight in Allah's way, so they slay and are slain. They fight in Allah's way. So what does it mean to fight how Allah wants you to fight?
It means you're a slave, you kill and be killed.
Yeah, because the reason we point this out is, and Yusuf Estes, he says it means combat them, and so on. He'll add a bunch of stuff in there which isn't correct. But lots of Muslims in the West will say, fighting, when it commands you to fight, for instance, in Surah 929, the word there is katalu. And it can mean all kinds of things, right? It can mean, for instance, debating. It can mean having discussions. Fighting, because, it's a kind of fighting if you're debating. You're kind of combating their ideas, right? What this verse, Surah 9, and by the way, everyone out there are certain verses of the Quran you need to know, you need to be aware of.
Right.
And one of them is,
I can have the time, I will get into that right now.
Yeah. One of the verses everyone needs to know about Islam is Surah 929, which commands Muslims fight those who do not believe in Allah. But then one of the immediate responses is, well, fighting can mean lots of things. True. If we, on a football field, we say fight. When for our team or something like that. You're not saying go out and kill anyone. But Allah in Surah 9, verse 111, this is one of the verses people need to know because it defines the sort of fighting that we're talking about in Surah 9. The sort of fighting that's being discussed involves slaying and getting slain. This is physical fighting, swords, spears, horses, blood, killing. That's what this sort of fighting in Surah 9 is. All right, what do you have?
Okay, now, on Yusuf Estes, going back when someone says, what about this fighting, and he goes back to something about the pagans. Someone asked a question fighting the Jews and Christians, and he makes it killing the pagans, and he does go back to 2. Well, I would refer to the Reliance of the Traveler, Umdat al-Salik, 09.0 Jihad, and the scriptural basis for jihad prior to scholarly. I'm actually reading this here. The scriptural basis for jihad prior to scholarly consensus, is such Quranic verses as, and they're all clips. Fighting is prescribed for you, Quran 2:216. That's pagans. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, and yeah, no, there are certainly commands to fight the pagans, and the general. We usually break it down. We usually break it down into sort of a pre-jihad stage or a stealth jihad stage when it doesn't involve physical fighting, and then we break it down into a defensive stage and then an offensive stage. When if you go to actual Muslim scholars, we do that for simplicity. Actual Muslim scholars and Abu Humayd, who was the imam at the Grand Mosque in Mecca, and in the Darussalam edition of Sahih al-Bukhari, they actually include an essay by him. He breaks it down into 4 categories. There is the time when Muslims are not allowed to fight at all. Then there is a time when Muslims are allowed to fight defensively. They're allowed, but they're not required. So if you want to defend yourself, you're free to do so. If not, don't worry about it. Then there is another stage beyond that where they are commanded to fight defensively towards people who are posing some kind of threat to the Muslim community or even ridiculing the Muslim community. In speaking, you can speak against the Muslim community, and you have to defend yourself against criticism. And so there is this. So you have these multiple stages. But yes, this is during the time when Muslims were dealing with the pagans, and they weren't actively out there subjugating Jews and Christians even yet. In fact, during this time, Muhammad's saying pretty nice things about lots of Jews and Christians.
Yes,
but the point is, the rules of Islam change, and what this does is it allows someone like Yusuf Estes, right? It allows someone like Yusuf Estes to come into a Western context where most of us would allow fighting defensively. Most Westerners wouldn't have a problem with fighting defensively. So he knows who he's talking to. He knows what kind of people he's talking to, and he says, "Hey, you want to know what Islam talks about when it talks about fighting? It's right here, man. Fight and self-defense. You don't have a problem with that, do you?" And he totally keeps their attention away from what the Quran later says about actively going out and subjugating and fighting unbelievers simply for being unbelievers.
Precisely. Now, I use that one today, 533. And mere disbelief is war against Allah and His Apostle, Ibn Kathir.
Yeah, and actually, if we get to it, I gave them a bunch of clips. We've only gotten through like 2 or 3 of them already, and the show's halfway over. So eventually, matter of fact, we might even skip to this because you pointed out Surah 533, and the reason that's so important is Muslims will quote Surah 532 and say, according to Islam, anyone who kills a man, it's as if he killed all mankind. That's what Islam teaches. So obviously we can't believe in terrorism and so on if anyone who kills a man, it's as if he killed all mankind. When if you read that in context, there are all kinds of problems. One, it says that was a teaching of the Jews. That was a teaching of the Jews.
Precisely.
Second, it doesn't say if anyone kills a man, it's as if he killed all mankind. It says if anyone kills a man, apart from making mischief in the land, right? Apart from making mischief in the land. And you go to the next verse, what's the 533, which you just pointed to. What's the penalty for making mischief in a Muslim land? Killing, crucifixion, dismemberment, all kinds of horrible things, right? And Muslims will go to 532, the verse before it. They'll rip one little part out of context. They'll say this is what Islam teaches. They'll ignore the very next verse, which commands them to horribly brutalize anyone who does anything against Islam. And they'll say, you see there, Islam is a religion of peace, and anyone who says otherwise, they must be ripping something out of context. It's Muslims who are ripping verses out of context.
Precisely.
Because in context, 532, the context is 533. In context is a horribly violent passage. It's a horrible. In fact, 533 justifies the 9/11 attacks. It justifies the Fort Hood massacre. Why? Think about it, my friends. 533 says the penalty for making mischief in a Muslim land is death. Is the United States making mischief in a Muslim land? From a Muslim perspective, it is. The United States is over there, has a military presence, a non-Muslim military presence in Muslim countries. It doesn't get any. You can't make more mischief than that from a Muslim perspective. So what's the penalty? Death. And here's the key: according to Islam, not according to me, according to Islam, if you support an army, you're just as responsible as the army for what they're doing. In other words, you have the military, right? They're over there in Muslim land. So according to Islam, they're making mischief in a Muslim land. Anyone who pays the bills for them is just as guilty as they are. Who's paying the bills for the military? We are. Normal American taxpayers. And then we're all shocked when Osama bin Laden sends some planes into the World Trade Center. But what about all those innocent people? According to Islam, they're not innocent. If you're funding the American military, you're not innocent. You are equally responsible for making mischief. What's the penalty for making mischief in a Muslim land according to 533? Death. So Muslims are called upon to kill you, normal American citizen, everyday American citizen out there who's going around, you pay your taxes. Muslims are commanded to kill you. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. Most Muslims aren't going to do it. But they're supposed to do it according to what their sources teach.
This is correct. Yes, I agree completely. I agree completely. It can be as little as singing. I was reading that today. You don't kill monks, old men, women, unless they do something like singing. That was literally said in a tafsir as supporting.
Yeah.
And it's also when Muhammad took Mecca the second time, or actually the first time in 628, he had several people killed, and one was a poet and one was a singer, I believe.
Yeah, and he certainly had women killed and so on. But the idea here is that there is, and this is something Westerners need to get their minds around, there is a vast difference between what Muslims would regard as a defensive war and what we would regard as a defensive war.
Exactly.
Totally different. Again, there is a totally different idea of war in Islam than from what we think of as war. We think when we say war or battle or something like that, we think two armies marching against each other. In Islam, if you even speak against Muhammad, if you criticize Muhammad, you have launched a war against Islam, and they have to do something back to you. And the reason we need to understand this is it's very easy for a Muslim or someone like Yusuf Estes to say, look at what the Quran teaches about fighting the pagans and so on. It's defensive war. When if you read what it actually teaches, for instance, Surah 9 and so on, when it's talking about the pagans who break their treaties, right? The pagans who break their treaties, you have to fight and kill them. And if you keep reading, you see one of the ways of breaking your treaty is to criticize Islam or to speak negatively about Muhammad. So just talking about Islam in a disapproving manner was enough to call for your death, according to Muslims. And so the point is, as a Muslim, and we might even do this tomorrow, a Muslim will read this passage. Someone like Zakir Naik will read this passage and say, you see who it's talking about? It's talking about treaty breakers. Oh, evil people who are attacking the Muslim community. How are they attacking the Muslim community? Simply by speaking against Islam. And that was enough to call for their deaths.
Right. Okay. Well, and Bob, just one last thing. The young lady from London was talking about 4157, or you were anyway, and I just want to know if of course I'm not the only person who ever noticed, but did Allah himself started Christianity by putting someone else on the cross so that they thought they killed him?
Oh yeah, I've been pointing that out as one of the main problems in Islam for years. And if you could go to, I have a like a 40-minute YouTube video on it. It's titled something like what Islam really teaches about Allah and Jesus. So if anyone wants to watch it, what Islam really teaches about Allah and Jesus, it's on YouTube. But you're absolutely correct, and you can take this a step further. Muslims say that the gospel has been, so this is the gospel right here. Muslims say that the gospel has been corrupted, right? Muslims say that the gospel has been corrupted. That's funny. I open up my gospel and it says Jesus died by crucifixion. Who corrupted the gospel? Who corrupted the gospel? Who made people believe that Jesus died by crucifixion?
Right.
According to Islam, who made people think that Jesus died by crucifixion?
Exactly. Of course, Allah did. Why the
Allah, Allah.
I believe
And so,
there's
and
one
so,
translation that says
so that's very interesting because Muslims want to say, oh, the Apostle Paul or Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, they corrupted the. Wait a minute. They could have corrupted some things, my Muslim friend, but who corrupted the idea of Jesus' crucifixion? That was Allah. And that is part of the bedrock. That is part of the core of Christianity, was Jesus' death on a cross. So Christianity, which according to Islam is the largest false religion in the world, Christianity could have never got started without the deception of Allah. Now, the problem is Allah either knew that he was starting a false religion by deceiving people into thinking Jesus died on the cross, or he didn't know. If he didn't know, then he's not all-knowing. He's not God. If he did know, then he's deliberately deceptive. He starts false religions. What kind of God deliberately starts false religions that are going to keep people from the truth? That's just some creepy stuff. But
in support of what you just said, that he did the second option, he did know. Allah leads people astray as he will. You know that verse. And Allah has made people as fuel for hell.
And I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, in this situation, Allah actually gives evidence against Islam. If I'm reading the Quran, right? So I open up the Quran, I read it, and I say, hey, you know, how accurate is this? And then I read, Jesus didn't die on the cross, which, not according to me, according to some of the most vocal critics of Christianity, people like Bart Ehrman and so on, that Muslims love to quote, Bart Ehrman and the Jesus Seminar and all these atheists and agnostic scholars who study Christianity, they all say one of the best established facts of ancient history is that Jesus died by crucifixion. And Islam contradicts that. And how do they explain it away? Well, Allah is such a great trickster. He's so great at deceiving people that he managed to deceive literally billions of people down through the ages into believing Jesus died by crucifixion. And that's their explanation for why the evidence goes against Islam. But, I mean, think about that. If you're going to do that, you could say anything. You could say anything, right? So if you're going to say God likes to deliberately deceive people into believing false things, how can you know anything after that, right? So Muslims say, oh, there's all this evidence for Islam. Maybe Allah deceived you into believing that. You believe in a deceiver who deceives people for no reason, right? Isn't that the God you believe in? A God who will come up and just invent all kinds of things, lead people astray, start a false religion? In other words, if you were going to say, why did Allah deceive those people in Jesus' time? You know, what are you going to say? He didn't like them or something, right? So he sent them this false belief. Well, why not say Allah didn't like the Arabs and therefore he sent them this false prophet Muhammad? Why not do that? Why not do that? Once you introduce an all-powerful deceiver into the equation, we don't know what to believe. We don't know what to believe anymore. And you can't believe anything because you never know when this all-powerful deceiver is deceiving you. All right, what do we have next? Jose? Hey, Jose, what's up? You hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you know, to talk about that one about Paul, they always talk about Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say first is that Paul died like 67 years after like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So how could they, you know, they always say that Paul corrupted it, but yet in the Quran it says in Surah 3 that the Christians will be victorious until the day of judgment. Now, how could they keep on blaming Paul if Paul died a couple of years after, you know, not if he lived right about the same time as Jesus? So how could he have corrupted it? And then later on, Muhammad says that the gospel is true. So, you know, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
Yeah. I was just making sure you're finished.
And then also, too, now I was going to talk about the red velvet. You know, like, is a topic about the difference between Jesus and Muhammad?
Well, the show is about differences between Jesus and Muhammad. Tonight we are focusing on some claims about Yusuf Estes on terrorism, and we sort of got sidetracked by calls.
Well, on the thing about terrorism, one of the things that was interesting was that, you know, like after the Battle of Badr, the thing about the red velvet, you know, that kind of, to me, showed him that they were more like pirates, more like bandits.
Absolutely, no question.
Yeah.
Islam supported their religion through robbery. And it's if you look at the context, if you look at the context of Surah 929, which is, that's kind of the theme for tonight, Surah 929. This is what Yusuf Estes was supposed to be answering and never actually answered. He diverted to another topic. But Surah 929 says, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and it goes on until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So until they're paying you to avoid killing them. But if you look at the context, the verse before it, Surah 928 says that the pagans were no longer allowed to take the pilgrimage to Mecca. That was one of the major sources of income for the people of Mecca. And so the people wanted to know, how are we going to make money now? How are we going to make money now that the pagans aren't coming here and bringing all their money in? And the Surah 928 says Allah is going to enrich you. How is Allah going to enrich them? Next verse, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay you. So fighting and subjugating people in order to get money from them is essential to Islam. And Muhammad even said in Sahih al-Bukhari, my livelihood, so how he makes his living, my livelihood is beneath the shade of my spear. Fighting is a source of income. Subjugating Jews and Christians is a source of income. And that, ever since Muslims started fighting, their first physical confrontations were raids. They were caravan raids. It was the Meccans sending out caravans of trade, and Muslims would come in and attack them. And eventually, Muslims killed someone during one of these raids. And that's what actually led to the Battle of Badr. What led to the Battle of Badr was the Muslims had killed someone during the holy month when there was supposed to be a truce. So yes, pirate is a good description of the early Muslim community. The brother also brought something up, and it's kind of on a different topic, but since he brought it up, I wanted to give people the reference because it's so important for people to know this. Earlier we said here are verses that people need to know. Surah 61 verse 14 is one of the verses that people need to know. It says, "O you who believe, be helpers in the cause of Allah, as Jesus, son of Mary, said to his disciples, who are my helpers in the cause of Allah?" The disciples said, we are helpers in the cause of Allah. So a party of the children of Israel believed, and another party disbelieved. Then we aided those who believed against their enemy, and they became uppermost. Let me read that again. We aided, these are talking about Jesus followers, people followed Jesus, people believed in Jesus. We aided those who believed against their enemy, and they became uppermost. Who became uppermost who became uppermost in the early history of Christianity? Who became uppermost? The believers, right? The true followers of Jesus. How can you turn around and say Paul corrupted Christianity right there at the beginning? According to the Quran, the true followers of Jesus won. There were the unbelievers, and that God helped the true believers until they were uppermost. And if I have a Yusuf Ali translation right here, read what Yusuf Ali says. He says, this refers to Christians taking over the Roman Empire. He helped the believers in Jesus. How could this be corrupted? The Christians at the time of the Roman Empire certainly believed in Jesus' death, resurrection, and deity. So if there were some other believers in Jesus who believed he was just a prophet and so on, wouldn't they have been the true believers? And if they were the true believers, they lost. We have no record of them even existing. They lost horribly. We don't have any evidence that these early Muslim followers of Jesus ever existed. That's how bad they lost. We can't even point to their existence, except as a matter of blind faith in Islam. So if they lost, and false followers of the Apostle Paul, the evil Apostle Paul, came along and distorted Christianity, why does Allah call people who believe in Paul's doctrines the true believers that he helped? Why would Allah help them? Why would Allah help the false teachers and call them the true believers? That's the point. Islam makes no sense. It doesn't make sense. How do you say Christianity's been corrupted? It was corrupted by the Apostle Paul, when actually it was corrupted by who? Allah, who tricked people into believing Jesus died by crucifixion. But then you turn around and say, and the true believers won. Allah helped them become victorious. Wait a minute, you just told me that it was corrupted. Make up your mind. So if the true believers were victorious, then Islam is false, because the true believers said things that totally contradict Islam. On the other hand, if the true believer is lost, then Islam is false, because Islam says that the true believers won. So either way, Islam is false. This is one of the dilemmas that you're stuck with, my Muslim friends, and there's no way out of it. All right. We still have callers? All right, who do we have? Who? Radical Moderate.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hey, what's up?
Yeah, this is Radical Moderate. Hey, I just wanted to give a call, give a shout-out. Looking forward to the debate on Monday night with you and Robert Spencer.
Oh, yeah, and if I should have mentioned that earlier. For those who like debates, this Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be debating Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch on the topic of his new book, Did Muhammad Exist? I don't believe in Islam. I don't believe Muhammad was a prophet, but I do believe Muhammad existed, that he was a real person. There was some real person named Muhammad who was delivering the Quran to his followers and claiming that he's a prophet and so on. Robert doesn't believe that that sort of person existed, that there was this prophet delivering the Quran. His name was Muhammad. He went out and his followers went out conquering in his name. And how do we deal with this? Am I just going to call him a bigot? Is he going to send me threatening emails? That's not how we do things. If we have a disagreement, we settle it. Like true Westerners, I will present my case for Muhammad's existence. He will present his case against Muhammad's existence. And we'll go back and forth and we'll see who has the stronger case. And the goal here is that people actually learn something. So our goal is not to silence the opposition. I want Robert to speak. I want him to give any evidence he might have. The goal is for people to learn something and learn what both sides have to say so that they can make an informed decision. All right, what do you have, buddy?
To mention regarding this Sunday as well, there's going to be a debate with Anthony Rogers and a Muslim. Just wanted to say Anthony Rogers' presentation is well worth the admission. I hope we can post it on your site. I think that would be great.
No question.
But anyway, regarding, I thought about this, the last call, well, the Muslim caller that called in regarding Jesus' response to the woman where he said it is not fit to throw the children's food to the dogs. I wonder how that Muslim would have responded if he was that woman. And if he, if he heard that woman say that. I'm sorry, if he heard Jesus say that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Would he have cussed Jesus out? Would he have walked away in a huff?
Yeah.
I've
Your daughter who's dying has just been miraculously healed by Jesus, and yeah, you're gonna sit around complaining. He was mean to me, and Jesus is making a point. These, you had the Jews. God sends them revelation. He tells them to stick to it. You have people who are constantly corrupting the message. Does God owe them anything? Does God owe them anything? And the answer is no. God doesn't owe any of us anything. And if Jesus comes and says, "Hey, I'm going to give these, I'm going to give some of these miracles to the Jews," does anyone have the right? Does anyone else in the area, especially people who've been corrupting, doing everything in their power to corrupt belief in Yahweh for all these years, does anyone have a right to come up and say, "Hey, I want a miracle"? The answer is no. And so Jesus draws a point. Hey, I want you to understand, me giving you something that you do not deserve, you have no right to, would be like me taking, if I brought bread to my children and gave it to someone else, gave it to a dog. That's what it would be like. It's not meant for you. You have no right to that. You have no right to this. Do you understand that? She says, "Yes, I understand, but throw me some crumbs." And he heals her. And she didn't go away throwing a tantrum. "Oh, he was so mean to me." And it's just ridiculous that someone quotes the dog part and then ignores the rest of the passage where he does give the woman the miracle.
Say that I've actually heard Muslims say that they would actually call Jesus a son of a dog. If anybody called them a dog, they would call them a son of a dog. And I find that just very strange on that. One final thing, since this was actually about Yusuf Estes, your show tonight, have you ever heard the Yusuf Estes reversion story?
What?
And how he made his living? Have you ever heard the Yusuf Estes reversion story?
No.
Where he talks about how he made his living?
how he used to sell trinkets, religious trinkets at flea markets, and how his father, who co-owned the business, got a Muslim partner from Egypt where they used to buy these trinkets from. And that partner came and visited with him, and they went out on the road to different flea markets. And now this is a Christian, mind you, supposedly Yusuf Estes, and he's selling the junk, okay, the non-sale items out in front. He's trying to hawk the stuff that nobody wants, and the Muslim says, no, you got to put the good merchandise up in front, which is just kind of common business sense. You know what I mean? And hearing this, it's just like, wow, you weren't a Christian. You were making money stealing from Christians. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that's pretty much it. Thanks for the show.
All right,
good
brother.
night. God bless. All right, bye.
All right. Okay, cool. Let's try to get to a couple more quick clips here before we move on. I'm going to try and go through these very rapidly because I thought I was going to get through all the clips tonight. Let's go ahead and go to the next clip, and we'll see how far we can get. So I'll just give brief. I'll give a couple of brief comments. We'll try and get to some of these because there's some important things we need to take note of. Right.
Now, let's deal with a couple of words here. Actually, in Arabic, it really doesn't say fight, and it really doesn't say kill. You know, it does and it doesn't. Let me explain why. The word fight, sometimes translated as slay, slaughter, and things like this, doesn't really work. Let me explain why. The word in Arabic doesn't change. It's from the same root. It's qitl or qital. The first instance, it's talking about engaging in mortal combat. That's why it uses a form of this word. It's not fight like put up your dukes or martial arts or something like that. No, it's the kind of fighting that can result in death. It is combat. So use combat here and you'll see how it makes sense. Combat them if they combat you. But if they stop, then you stop. Otherwise, you're the transgressor. Move to the next verse. Kill them in combat if they're killing you in combat. But again, if they stop, you have to stop. You know, it says to turn them out from where they turned you out. Now, this is another key, because nowhere in here so far have we heard anything about Jews and Christians, because it wasn't talking about Jews and Christians. It was saying turn them out from where they turned you out.
Think about what he just said. We haven't heard anything about Jews and Christians there because it isn't talking about Jews and Christians. Right, it's not. Why did you go to this passage? Why did you go to this passage, Yusuf? You were asked a question about Jews and Christians. Are Muslims supposed to fight Jews and Christians? You go to this passage and says, oh, you see, there's nothing here about fighting Jews and Christians. Right, because it's in Surah 9, which you have avoided this entire time. Now, one thing I have a problem with, at least he's admitting that this has to do with going out and this has something to do with violence, this kind of fighting, right? He says combating, and he says it means combat those who are combating you. That's part of it, but even there, he takes away from some of the real meaning of it, because again, this can involve even persecuting Muslims in various ways, blocking them from taking the pilgrimage to Mecca, things like that. If you aren't letting a Muslim take the pilgrimage to Mecca, if you're not letting him take the pilgrimage, you're not combating him, right? That's not an active war. You're not marching an army out. You're just saying you can't come here, right? And Muslims today do this. I'm not allowed to go to the Kaaba in Mecca. I'm not allowed to go there, right? But that doesn't mean they're combating me. So when he says, oh, you combat those who combat you, that's once again deceptive. It's you fight these people who are fighting you, but they can fight you in all kinds of ways, namely through not allowing you to even go to the Kaaba. Let's go to the next clip because we want to get through a couple of these.
It was particularly talking about one instance that took place in the early days when the Muslims were literally thrown out of their own homes, off of their own land, away from their own property. Their property and all of the contents was seized by these people, the pagan idolaters of Mecca, their own relatives. And their women were abused, raped, and they were killed and slaughtered, turned out into the desert, and left for over 2 years to die. If it weren't for the soft hearts of a few folks, they would have all died. They migrated then to Medina, a faraway city. And in that place, they were able to become stronger. There were more people that came into Islam, and they wanted to perform what is called pilgrimage or Hajj to Mecca. They went, but they were turned away and said, you can't come and do your religious rituals here. Even though everybody else in the whole world could come there, all kinds of religions could come and do it, but they wouldn't let these Muslims from Medina do that.
Think about the irony here. Yusuf Estes is saying, you see that? Of course Muslims had to fight them. They wouldn't let people take the pilgrimage. The pagans wouldn't let the Muslims take the pilgrimage to Mecca. What happens as soon as Muslims took over the area? They said the pagans don't get to take the pilgrimage to Mecca anymore. That's called hypocrisy. It's wrong for you to keep us away from the Kaaba, but if we get the chance, we're going to keep you away from the Kaaba. If it's wrong to keep people from taking this pilgrimage, and even said all people from all over the world could take the pilgrimage, can you do that today? Can I take the pilgrimage to Mecca? I'm not allowed in the city of Mecca. The pagans are no longer allowed to take the pilgrimage to Mecca. So Muslims, once again, and you'll see this throughout Islam, maybe we do an entire show one day on hypocrisy, but Muslims will constantly condemn other people for doing exactly what the Muslims do. And very, very disturbing. Now, I think Yusuf Estes tremendously exaggerated the persecution of Muslims during this early period, especially when you read that Muhammad was actually constantly antagonizing the people of Mecca to the point where he even said he's going to slaughter them. This is when he was in Mecca still. This is when he was still the persecuted prophet in Mecca. He's threatening to slaughter them. We'll save that for a different show because I wanted to point out once again, what does this have to do with Judaism and Christianity? What does this have to do with fighting the Jews and Christians? Yusuf Estes is pointing out this passage that he brought up. He's the one who brought this passage up, and he's saying, aha, there's nothing about fighting Jews and Christians here. Right, that's because you went to the wrong chapter of the Quran. Why? Either because you didn't know where to go, in which case he's ignorant, or because he's deliberately trying to mislead people away from what Islam actually teaches about the Jews and Christians. And there are clear instances of what Islam teaches about Jews and Christians. He goes to a passage that deals with pagans. Why? To make it sound like Islam is just calling for defensive jihad. And it's not. Here it is, but that has nothing to do with what Muhammad said about the Jews and Christians. Let's go ahead to the next clip. Things are about to get interesting here.
They made an agreement with them, and the agreement was very much slanted in favor of the Meccans. And yet the Meccans, even then, broke the agreement later. So the Muslims wanted to go, and they wanted to perform their holy pilgrimage or Hajj to Mecca. When they went, this time they were told by Allah in the Quran that if they engage in a fight against you, you can fight with them. Because one of the things about the pilgrimage they were worried about is, I can't fight. I'll be wearing 2 towels, and the rule is known that in the religions, all of the religions around there, when you're in the state of ihram or the state of pilgrimage, you're not allowed to fight. So these guys can come chop your head off. You can't do anything about it. But here comes the verse saying, no. If they fight you, then you can fight them back in combat. Even though you're wearing the 2 towels, and you can still fight. You can carry your sword with you. Okay? Then, if they're killing you, even you can go to that extent. It continues, though, in the next verse after that, saying, but don't do this. Don't do this in the holy place. The holy place, or the sanctuary, unless they're doing that to you there in the sanctuary. And again, you can defend yourself. And this is what it's talking about.
This is what it's talking about. There are, some differences of opinion of how Surah 2 was compiled or put together. But it sounds like Yusuf Estes is interpreting this as being a revelation that had to do with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And I think that's a bit out of place. I think Surah 2 came a few years before that, but the Quranic revelation during this time was a big giant mess, so we'll lay that aside. We actually need to do a show on that treaty and how it was actually Muslims who broke the treaty. We'll lay that aside for now. Again, let's just come back to this main idea. Yusuf Estes is saying, you see, this had to do with fighting these pagans who broke this treaty, what was he asked again? What was the question asked to him? What is he answering right now? He's answering a question, why does the Quran command you to fight Jews and Christians? Well, there's this treaty with the pagans, and during this time, and the Muslims didn't. Why are you talking about this? Imagine, my friends, you ask me a question, I totally change the subject, and I start talking about something else. Aren't you going to get the impression that I'm trying to avoid the real issue? One thing that Yusuf pointed out, and it's interesting, is he did point out that before this revelation, you're on a pilgrimage. You're not supposed to fight, even if they're attacking you. And he says, but then this verse came which said, if they fight you, then you can fight them. What's he just admitted? He admitted that the rules change in Islam, right? He admitted that a verse can be revealed that changes what you were supposed to do before, right? Right, and I agree with him completely. There was a time when Muslims weren't allowed to even defend themselves. And now Muslims were allowed to fight defensively. The problem is, this verse wasn't Muhammad's final marching orders. Later on, when Muslims were in a position of power, at this time they weren't. Later, when Muslims were in a position of power, they were commanded to violently subjugate everyone who disagrees with them. But you never get that from Yusuf Estes. But let's continue and see if he does come up with anything that explains the command to fight Jews and Christians.
It also uses a word in Arabic, which is fitna. It says this qitl, this kind of combat and killing, is still not as bad as the fitna that's going to be caused if you don't do it. Because when people are killing you, this is a fitna. And you must respond back. So anytime there's acts of aggression or terrorism against you and the Muslims in general, then you've been ordered now to go and fight back and stop it as much as you can, and then if they stop, you have to stop. I hope this clarified some of the questions you might have on this subject, and if you have more about this, I want you to visit our internet website to get clarification.
No, actually, Yusuf, that didn't clarify the question at all. The question was, what about the Quran's command to fight Jews and Christians? Could you explain that for us? What did he do? By the way, that was his entire response. I didn't leave anything out. That was his response. What did he do? He changed the subject to an earlier revelation that had nothing to do with Jews and Christians, and he kept saying, but there's nothing about Jews and Christians here. Right, because you went to that. It's not, in other words, it would be different if I said, Yusuf Estes, what about the fighting and killing of Jews and Christians in Surah 2, verse 190? And he says, oh, look, there's nothing here. Well, then he would be refuting me. But if I say, in general, what does the Quran say about fighting Jews and Christians? And he goes to Surah 2, 190 and says, look, there's nothing here. Right. No one said it was. Surah 9, verse 29, that's what commands you to fight and subjugate. I would love to hear your response, but unfortunately, you just don't give it. You change the subject. Now, there's one thing very, very disturbing about what he just said. Yusuf Estes just said, there's this word here, fitna, right? Yusuf Estes, if you ask him, and he says this in his videos, his favorite translation of the Quran is Hilali Khan, the Hilali Khan translation. It's a Salafi translation. But he referred to fitna, which is Surah 2, verse 193. Let's look at how his favorite translation of the Quran translates this word fitna in this verse to see what it means. Because remember, I'm the one who said when it says fight, it doesn't just refer to what we're thinking of as combat. It can refer to people doing all kinds of things, and you're supposed to fight them for it. Let's read Yusuf Estes' favorite translation of the Quran. Watch what he just did. Hilali Khan, chapter 2, verse 193. And fight them until there is no more fitna. What's it mean? According to Hilali Khan, disbelief and worshiping others along with Allah. That's what fitna means according to Yusuf Estes' favorite translation. Let's read, so pay attention to what this says. Fight them until there is no more disbelief and worshiping others along with Allah. His favorite translation says what this is actually talking about is fighting people until there's no more disbelief. And when it says once they stop, if they cease, then you cease, It means if they stop disbelieving, if they stop believing these false things about God, then you stop fighting them. So given his favorite translation of the Quran, this is actually much, much, much more violent and disturbing than he's letting on. He's saying, oh, it just refers to people who are attacking you in combat, and then you have the right to defend yourself. According to his favorite translation, it actually refers to fighting people based on their beliefs, and the only way to stop you from fighting and killing them is if they come to believe in Islam. And that's the passage he went to. This isn't the passage we brought up. This is the passage he went to show how peaceful Islam is. Look, he had the entire Quran to go to, right? Because he's the one that brought this passage up. He wants to show that Islam is peaceful. He had the entire Quran to go to show that Islam is peaceful. Where did he go? He went to Surah 2, 190 to 193, which, as we've just seen, calls for Muslims, at the end of the day, calls for Muslims to fight people because of their beliefs. But it's not talking about Jews and Christians, and so what's the problem? Well, the problem is this isn't the only passage in the Quran. This passage, according to his favorite translation, calls for violence and bloodshed against pagans, against disbelievers, against polytheists. Later revelations call for violence towards Jews and Christians. And is that the signal for the end? Okay. Well, we have to break it off here because it is midnight where we are. We're going to continue tomorrow. We're going to look at we'll look at some clips from. We're going to look at 3 more clips from Yusuf Estes to see how he continues misrepresenting what Islam teaches, and we'll also look at some clips from Zakir Naik, because what Islam's most popular apologists are doing, they're constantly distorting not only the Bible, which they do, but also the Quran to make it more palatable for a Western audience. But look, if you really have to water down your religion and change it and distort its teachings in order to make it even acceptable, one, that tells us something about, it tells us 2 things about your religion. One, it tells us that if you presented it like it is, it wouldn't be acceptable. But also, it tells us that your religion allows you to deliberately distort these teachings in order to make them more acceptable to us. And that should all be highly disturbing to anyone who's interested in the truth. So we'll be looking at that. Tomorrow night, we'll continue looking. We'll get through Yusuf Estes really quick, and we'll go on to some passages by Zakir Naik. We'll see how Muslims themselves, and not just any Muslims, the most popular defenders of Islam today, are deliberately distorting the teachings of Islam. And the question we're going to have to ask ourselves is why? So we'll see you again tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. And if you have questions, especially as they relate to this issue, terrorism, violence, passages of the Quran, hope you'll call in tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow night on Jesus or Muhammad.